You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com.
So I'm seeing a lot of pitching injuries going around Major League Baseball. Old friend Lucas Giolito out for the year. In our fantasy baseball league, he was actually just traded by one team to another, and my uncle reached out to me. It's like, wow, did I lose that trade now? And the White Sox avoided it by not signing him. And every time I see a guy that ends up with Tommy John, and he was just on another team for years and years and years, you wonder, right? Like, you wonder how much they knew just through their regular checkups with him, that, hey, down the line, this may be coming, right? I mean, it's the same thing with my mechanic. The guy does a whole once-over, and he goes, this is what you got to fix now. This is what's coming in a year.
Yeah.
And I see what happens to Lucas Giolito. You see what happened to Santos after he left and heads off to the Mariners. And you see this happen all the time in baseball. And you wonder just a little bit, Ed.
Oh, there's no doubt about it where, I mean, even thinking about, like, back when they traded Chris Sale. Yeah, I know what the whole rebuild and everything was supposed to be, but I think everybody who looked at him knew the way his mechanics, the way he put torque on his arm, you knew at some point he was going to start getting hurt. And now he's back and he's going to pitch well and all that stuff. He's had his first full real offseason and whatever. But yeah, there's a likelihood that the White Sox looked at Lucas Giolito and just said, based on what he throws, what kind of pitches he throws, and how he torques his arm and everything, that we're going to see an issue. And it's bound to happen with somebody else along the way as well. But this time of year is wonderful for a couple of things. One is, that hope springs eternal, and you get to see players and you get to see guys that you're like, oh, I didn't think he'd have a chance to make the team, and he totally has a chance, and I can't wait to see what this guy can do. Or you got new players on the team you're going to get used to. Then there's the other side of it, which is where, guys that you were counting on that you were excited about are going to start getting hurt, and they're going to have issues, and you're going to have key players on teams that are going to go down, and you're going to sit there and have that sort of crushing blow and crushing defeat of knowing that, if you're a Red Sox fan right now, knowing that this guy that was one of the only things that they did to improve their team over last year, a bad team last year, is now going to be gone for the season. You're sitting there going, why? Like, what do we have to look? Are we really back to really hoping Garrett Whitlock figures it out this year?
If you're a Red Sox fan, like, think about it. White Sox fans are always like, oh, that's so White Sox, right? Like, the Red Sox are going to pay nearly $40 million for Chris Sale and Lucas Giolito, and neither one of them are pitching for them this year. That's so Red Sox right there. And meanwhile, you got Sonny Gray dealing with an injury, Verlander's to the IL in Houston. You keep wondering whether or not Dylan Cease could possibly still be moved. There's only one Jordan Montgomery out there.
Well, yeah, because the other Jordan Montgomery is Blake Snell, and he's always hurt.
Right, exactly. And when those two guys run out, you got to go searching elsewhere. There's a lot of pitchers still sitting out there. I mean, it is crazy to see, like, Michael Lorenzen still sitting out there. For what you think about Mike Clevenger, the fact that he's still sitting out there and no team has knocked on his door, it's really strange to be this far in the spring training and have so many pitchers still unsigned. It's going to be fascinating to see where they end up and how these teams dealing with the injuries end up truly dealing with the injuries to be able to start the season and make it through the year.
Well, do you think that Kike Hernandez is right? Because he went on the AJ Pierzynski's podcast and said that there's collusion.
Yeah, he was on Foul Territory saying collusion. I believe it. I believe collusion is rampant in Major League Baseball. I don't think you can look at the American League Central and the payrolls of all of these teams and all of them in the bottom half and not say collusion between owners that are all keeping the price down. I've always felt that it's there. It exists. Whenever you have billionaires who can control the message with their own media companies that broadcast to the masses, you're going to have corruption. And you can't prove it, but I'll always believe it. I'll put the little tinfoil hat on and I'll believe it. And sometimes that tinfoil hat is not an indication that you're crazy when you're looking at things like that. Cork and Kerry on Western is going to be the place to be coming up on March 17th for the Southside Irish Parade. I'm going to be there. I don't know if you're going, but I'm going. Are you thinking about it? You're going to be there? It's a big party.
I'm thinking about it. I'm definitely thinking about it. I'm always thinking about it.
106th and Western. It's the epicenter of the parade. It's going to be beautiful. Right now, it's looking like you might get a little bit of drizzle in the evening, well after it's over. There's a possibility of, it looks like at least in the 50s.
No. That's just fine Irish weather. That's all that is there.
Right.
Okay?
I mean, at least in the 50s, could be in the high 50s. I mean, you may see that actually adjust into the 60s because there's warm air beforehand. I'm becoming like a weatherman because I'm trying to figure out, like, what's it going to be like on parade day? It never really matters, though. It's always a huge party. Now, before the parade, just a couple days before, they're going to be doing the drawing for the trip to Hawaii. You still have time. Get into that location or location, Cork and Carry at the park in the shadow of the ballpark at 33rd and Princeton. We're going to be celebrating all year long, pregame and postgame at the official home of the podcast for fans, by fans, Sox in the Basement. Get in, register for free. Kona Brewing and Cork and Carry giving away a trip to Hawaii. And Kona brews are $5 on draft right now. You don't need to buy one, but why wouldn't you buy one when you go and you register for the trip? I am convinced that Pedro is a fall guy. The more I listen to him talk about this team and say ridiculous things that any baseball person would roll their eyes at right now, the more I see that and the more I hear Chris Getz saying we intend to compete. I truly believe that when he went to the old man and said, I can do this better than Rick and Kenny, just give me the reins. I'm going to make changes. And he did make a lot of changes in the front office, and he's changed the philosophy. He didn't go out and spend a bunch of money, and that was probably something he had to promise to the old man that he wouldn't do. The other thing he probably had to promise, though, was that he wasn't going to get rid of a manager that was on a contract. And so he's going to lay this all at Pedro's feet at the end of the year when it doesn't work out and go get the manager that he wants. And meanwhile, nobody's going to question him because you got a guy like Raffol saying that Yoan Moncada is definitely a two-hitter in your lineup. And we suggested him, sure, but his reasoning is all about giving yourself up and moving guys over. You know, most teams in Major League Baseball put their best hitter, if not their second best hitter, in the two spot these days. It's very different now than it was back in the 80s.
Yeah, the idea of, you've got a Vince Coleman or a Ricky Henderson at the top of your lineup who is going to get on as just an on-base machine, and you're trying to get them around the bases and steal that first inning run isn't the way baseball's really played. And I understand that this is a team that has demonstrated amply so far in the very early going of spring training that they're not going to hit for much, but it still doesn't mean that you're looking for a guy to give up. Now, if you're saying, I'm going to put Yoan Moncada up there because we feel like he can handle lefties and righties both the same. We feel like that there's at least potential that if he's right, that he can provide something a little bit more of a spark at the top. And we're going to top load our offense with all of our best established guys as for whatever that means with this lineup. Okay. I mean, you can still put him there. And I'm not.
No, but I got a problem with it, my friend.
But I do. But I got a problem. I got a problem with, like you said, his explanation of the same reason why, you would sit there and argue about putting Scott Fletcher in the 2-hole back in the day. Because he handles the bat really well, and we feel like he can bunt guys over.
First of all, it's a Tony La Russa philosophy. And Pedro keeps talking about how he talks to Tony all the time. So that should just make your head want to explode, right? After you hear what he said. Okay. Secondly, you don't have a speed demon up at the top. You got Benintendi. And it makes sense to have him up there because he does well in that slot and he gets himself on base. But if you're going to go that direction, then you shouldn't be going with the table setting, move a guy over, sacrifice yourself type player in the 2 spot. You should go just with Robert and Jimenez 2-3. You should go with a guy who gets on base, and then you should make a pitcher have to deal with your 2 best hitters no matter what in the first inning. When you're going to have a poor offense, like the White Sox are going to have your best players get the most at-bats possible in every single game, so that when you look at the box score, those few guys are up at the top of the order who get 5 at-bats when everybody else got 4, or get 4 at-bats when everybody else got 3 because the pitcher was on. The guys with those higher number of at-bats, they get that extra 1 because they get to go through the lineup one more time, are Luis Robert Jr., Eloy Jimenez in the DH spot, and a guy like Benintendi getting on in front of him. In fact, I would make the argument that the ridiculous idea that Tony La Russa had about having like a secondary leadoff guy, with the talent they currently have on the team, I'd have that guy sitting in the 9 spot. So every time it came around, you at least had speed in the 9 spot and somebody you thought could get on base more often than not, rather than waste them in the 7 spot. Find somebody that you think is going to do well enough that in later innings, they're on in front of Benintendi be in the 9th spot, and it's not just a black hole in the 9th spot when you're flipping the lineup over, and then you get the Benintendi, Robert, and Jimenez. And I would have those guys right up at the top to scare the hell out of every pitcher in baseball. If you're going to play defense and hope to get ground outs and pitching and defense, that's what we're doing, right? That's the philosophy. Then get your best hitters, where you don't have a lot of them, right up at the top. Sox in the Basement listeners, switch to a new age of life with Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Keep mom and dad, grandma and grandpa out of assisted living. Make it so they can get around on their own. Live independently. Everything from stair lifts to ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, and even bathroom remodeling. And they're going to work with your insurance with 0% financing for qualified individuals. If you use a CPAP machine and you're unhappy with your vendor, switch now. Get supplies directly mailed to you. Plus, test it all out in their big, beautiful showroom right here on the south side. They also have the latest in continuous glucose monitors. Learn all about them at hhme.com. Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. And good to have Hyatt back. I like it when advertisers come back. Shows that we must be doing something right. Thank you to listener for supporting all of those that are on this program. James Fox is going to be joining us in just a moment from FutureSox, but you want to jump back in on my idea of this front-loaded lineup.
Well, and like I said, I would even accept if he figures that Yohan Moncada belongs in that conversation. I think it's a misdiagnosis based on what Yohan Moncada's been, but I could at least understand the thinking there, okay? If you're going to say it's about moving guys over and giving guys up, then why aren't we talking about Nicky Lopez in the second spot? Or why aren't we talking about Dominic Fletcher in the second spot, or Kevin Pillar, or, any one of the guys, even Paul DeYoung, guys that you're sitting there like, we don't care what his batting average is or whatever. We just want him to use the bat, put the bat on the ball, a high contact guy. No, Yohan Moncada's never been that. He's not a speed demon. He's not a leadoff hitter. He's none of those things. He was really at his best. We would want him to be a middle of the order guy. So yeah, it's the reasoning for me that drives me nuts, but I agree with you. I would love to see that lineup of just Benintendi, Robert, and Jimenez coming up in the first inning, because at least you have an opportunity to steal a run and get something. And then if Andrew Vaughn or whoever's behind Jimenez, and is batting in the 4th spot, has a chance to come up and do even more damage, that's great, because that really once you kind of get past that, it's going to start to fall off precipitously in terms of what we can realistically expect, because you're going to go from Andrew Vaughn, who we are hoping establishes himself as at least above average, down to Martin Maldonado, who we hope actually remembers to bring a bat up to the plate with him, because it hasn't mattered in his career so far.
Get all over the starting pitcher for the other team right at the beginning, because if you don't, you're going to go through the rest of this lineup, and it'll be the 4th inning before you're able to actually mount any kind of offense if you don't get anything done in the first. That's just how I see it. I mean, let's start thinking a little bit outside the box. We're already doing it with putting more emphasis on defense than hitting. So let's get nuts. You want to get nuts, Ed? Let's get nuts.
Let's get nuts.
Joining me on the phone line right now as we wade through spring training and wonder what the rosters are going to look like, James Fox of FutureSox is on the line. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, sir. How are you?
I'm good, man. I am enjoying seeing some younger guys make a little bit of noise, and the fact that the front office is not hyping them to the point where they're trying to sell you on this guy's going to be this and we're going to rely on him. It's more like who's making noise and could find a way to possibly bust through and make the lineup instead of being preordained. Are you getting the same feeling as well?
Yeah, it seems like it. Like last year when you knew that Oscar Colas was going to be the starting right fielder, I do not feel like that this time at all. And if they want to go with vets early that are probably, not that good, and you make prospects force their way onto the team, this is probably what you should have done all along, right? So yeah, no, I agree. I think it's very similar to the point where, maybe a couple of these guys that we're going to talk about here, there's some young guys in the bullpen potentially that I think can be pretty good, and I wouldn't necessarily bet on them starting in the big leagues just because I don't know that that's the way they kind of want to go here.
So let's talk about some of the guys that are a little bit high on prospect lists that are actually doing some good things. I think Brian Ramos is playing good defense, but there's really no room for him right now until Yohan Moncada has either a 6 WAR season that proves he should stay on the team, or he's bought out after this year and there's maybe room over at third base. I'm more interested in guys like a Nick Nastrini, who I know they have to add to the 40-man. I know it's only spring training, but he's had a couple appearances now early on that have made me think to myself, could this guy be part of the 5-man that's pitching throughout the year? And how soon do you think we can see him? Can he break camp with this team?
So what I would say is I don't think he's going to make the team, but I do think he spends the majority of the season in Chicago, like if that makes sense, right? I think he probably goes down because it's like you said, like he's not on the 40, and I think they might be adding like 4 or 5 of these NRIs to their team somehow, like on the 40, and so adding like another one doesn't really make sense. I think he's going to go down to Charlotte for a little bit, but I mean, he is probably their closest to the majors, like starting pitching option. Him and Jared Schuster, who was signed from the Braves, are probably, or acquired in the bummer trade from the Braves, are probably the next 2 guys in. But no, like Mastrini's interesting for sure. Something we talked about, me and Ian, on our show recently was like the comments made by Dylan Cease, and like the slept on thing is fine, whatever. But like, I just thought it was interesting him mentioning the starting pitching specifically. And he talked about him, and we know Soroka is looking to bounce back, and Fetty might have some upside, but then Kopech, right, is in the rotation. But the thing that interested me was he mentioned Garrett Crochet. Like, are they going to give Garrett Crochet a shot to be in the rotation in the big leagues? And then you just kind of, figure out like Chris Flexen's role behind that. And I'm sure you'll have to save innings. So that's maybe where Nastrini comes in, or a Jake Eater or Schuster, or one of these other guys, right? Like, I think they're pretty committed to seeing Crochet try to start, and there's no reason not to. I just kind of thought that they would make that commitment by sending him to the minor leagues. And it seems like they might not. It seems like they're like, well, we're bad, just put him in the rotation. Like, even if it's 3 innings, like we'll just have enough relievers to like cover it. So I think that's interesting. Like, those are the names of the starters. You're right on it. I wouldn't expect any of those prospect type guys to like break camp at this point, even though I do think we see a lot of them.
Well, it's weird when you bring that up about Crochet. I look at what they have pitching wise, and I say Michael Kopech and Garrett Crochet have the same problem. I don't believe that they can go deep in the games. Like, I don't believe I'm going to see them in the 6th inning most of the time. And so then what is Flexen? The guy that's like building a bridge to the bullpen, and he's a long relief role. If you're going to start both of those guys, like, you have 2 guys that I'm still not convinced can carry a starting pitcher load that you're going to put inside of your rotation. You seem to really like Flexen. You seem to almost anoint that he was going to be in the rotation, but I saw him in his appearance down in spring training. He's like the only guy out of that almost predetermined starting 5 going into camp that did not start his game. He came in after the starter went out and pitched. Did you notice that?
Yeah, and it was interesting. So, like, look, maybe it is like Garrett Crochet is your starter, knowing that Flexen's going to come in and like piggyback him or something. I mean, obviously, Touki Toussaint is like on the 40-man too, so like he could be a guy maybe in like a similar role where they do something like that. So I think it is interesting. I mean, especially with Brian Bannister here, like we could see some of that stuff. And then the bullpen is just like, who knows, right? Like, there's so many names and NRIs, and like half of them are hurt, and they're all kind of old. Like, it's just, I don't really know what they're going to do there either.
Well, Jordan Leisure looks like a guy who could be a closer. I mean, like he's kind of like the guy I'm watching in that bullpen that I'd like to see become something, because he could be someone for the next couple of years. You're sitting there going, wow, look at that deal that we made with the Dodgers and what we were able to get back if Nastrini plays well and Leisure plays well. I mean, that's, you'll sit there and you'll say, I didn't like a lot of what Rick Hahn did, but that wasn't a bad one at the end.
No, that one's good. And it's nice as like a throw in, right? Because like, look, like Jordan Leisure isn't like a top prospect because he's a reliever, but like relievers are super valuable, right? So we've seen like as a throw in a deal, like you get a cheap closer, then like you don't have to spend money on Kendall Graveman, right? Or Joe Kelly or some of these other guys. So yeah, I think Leisure's interesting. I think he's on the team for a lot of the year, but again, like he's another guy that's not on the 40. So like, do you start the year with, your conglomeration of John Brebbia and Jesse Chavez. And, I know Pedro has been talking about Corey Knable and like all these sorts of guys, right? Knowing that you have Jordan Leisure, you have a Prelander Baroa. One guy who I find particularly interesting is Alex Spees, who had a lot of pedigree coming out of high school, like years and years ago, and went to Texas. And, he kind of took a year off from baseball, and now he's like in the bullpen full time, and he throws like 102. Like those three guys like should get a lot of run this year. Again, though, I don't know that it's going to be done at the beginning of the year. I feel like it's going to be very veteran laden. But if you ask me, like, who leads the White Sox in saves this year, and look, they might only win 65 games, right? So maybe it's not many saves. Like I'd probably bet on it being Jordan Leisure, because I just feel like he's going to be the closer from June on for sure. Like there's no reason for that guy to be pitching in Charlotte for the majority of the year when he can help your big league team. So look, they could add him and he could be on the team to start the year. I just wouldn't necessarily bet on it with all of the 40-man spots that they need to create anyway.
Now, with you over at Future Sox, I love to kind of just ask you about a guy who I know is not going to make the team. Like he's a couple years away, but I keep hearing him getting mentioned. George Wolkow. Now, I remember when they went out and got this guy, I was like, oh, he's big like Aaron Judge, and maybe he'll turn into him. And I think I laughed, you laughed. Like that's a stretch. I mean, he's a young kid. I mean, yeah, he's got some power. Yeah, he's a tall guy. Yeah, maybe he's got similarities, but that's a stretch to just start using that name with a prospect who right now is 18 years old and an A-ball. But why do I keep hearing about him? What are your thoughts on him?
It's like the Joey Gallo toolkit, basically, is what it's like. I mean, he's just like a super athletic high school kid. And one of the interesting things about Wolkow is he was supposed to be in the 2025 draft class, and he reclassified to last year. And he wanted to like turn pro so bad that he signed with the White Sox for $1 million instead of going to South Carolina. I mean, he was 17 on draft. He's like just 18. He was like, it's basically like an international signing that's playing stateside. So the one thing that'll really help him is rookie ball starts earlier and ends earlier this year. So rookie ball starting like at the beginning of May. So normally these guys would just play fake baseball games in Arizona, like until the middle of June, and then their season would finally start. Now it's starting sooner. So some of your guys from the DSL that are super young and Wolkow and some of these other guys will be playing like right away, which is helpful for him. I don't think that he should reach like low A this year because he's so young and so raw. And that's the type of guy who goes to low A and strikes out 50% of the time, and you lose a kid completely. But I mean, look, he's ranking pretty much everywhere, like in their top 15 overall prospects. I mean, there were a lot of guys that had him as a top 50 guy in last year's draft. So yeah, like really, really interesting guy, just super duper far away. It's lots of strikeouts, tons of raw power, but he hits left-handed. Some people projected him to first base because he's like 6'7" already, but he's a muscular build. Like he looks pretty thin. So I think like the White Sox think he's right field profile. Yeah, he's definitely an interesting guy to watch. But there's just, he's just so far away because of how young he is. But look, like I would make an upside swing like that every year for $1 million. Like that's like nothing in a draft if you can get a guy like that and just, kind of take a chance on him. And they knew him very well because he's from Downers Grove North High School.
Back in, I want to say January, maybe December. I think it was January. The White Sox were putting out all these player profiles of young prospects, and they put up one with a picture of Jacob Gonzalez with some terrible stats. 34 games, only one home run, hitting 211 with a 593 OPS. And they got torched, their social media, for doing it. But now he's the talk of camp. Tell me why him being the talk of camp this year is different than maybe last year when you had Rick Hahn trying to push Romy on everybody. This is different, right?
Yeah, it's different just because he's young and there's like real pedigree, right? Like Jacob Gonzalez was the shortstop for Team USA for 2 years. Now he played in college, and he's had some wood bat success, which is good. But like he's like one of these guys who in college, like he didn't get worse, but he had such a good sophomore year when Ole Miss won the national championship. Like that his junior year was like just okay. And he was seen as like one of the top college guys in like one of these classes, but it's low upside. It's a weird profile, Chris, because like he can play shortstop, but he's like a 45 grade runner. So he's not fast. He's just like pretty steady at short. Now, he was always projected for like 20 home run power. He gets on base. He was horrible in his debut. And I usually don't care about prospect debuts for college guys because their season's so long, but like area scouts were talking about how bad he was. And those guys normally give the same type of leeway, right? Oh, college guy, whatever. Like his swing looked terrible. I don't know if you ever saw like, where he's like falling off, like, to the first base side constantly as a lefty where he like kind of looked like he was like trying to do some Ichiro thing. It was very strange. But yeah, like this spring, it's more compact. It looks a lot better. Like I retweeted his swing. Aaron Layton of Just Baseball was out looking at White Sox prospects and tweeted it. So yeah, I mean, look, I think he's got a lot of plate discipline. He hits left-handed and he can play shortstop, right? So I think it kind of depends on how much power he can generate, because if he has to move to third potentially because of the speed, his bat will need to play a little bit more. But no, I mean, he's a prospect. I think we're going to hear a lot about him. I mean, it's not the pick I would have made because, you and I do this often. Like I would just always prefer like a higher upside, like high school type guy, but he's safe. But when you take the safe guy, you don't want to hear the scouting director the night of the draft talk about changing his swing already, and it was just kind of like the whole thing, like they just didn't really do him justice. And then, the front office changed. So who knows? But yeah, like people that have seen him out on the backfield think he looks a lot better. MLB Pipeline's top 30 came out today. They have him 5 in a system that's, middle of the pack right now or so probably. So yeah, I think he's a guy definitely that's going to be interesting to watch, like at Winston-Salem, because he's going to get on base a ton, which, offers like some floor as it is.
All right, so let me give you a couple of names because I'm curious where you think these guys will eventually play if they make it to the major leagues, right? So I'll give you Jacob Gonzalez, Colson Montgomery, and Brian Ramos.
Yeah, so I think Colson Montgomery plays shortstop. I'm not going to tell you that he plays shortstop forever, right? But I think when he comes up, he will be playing shortstop for the White Sox. Brian Ramos is a third baseman, so like I don't know if that's like a Moncada DL stint and Brian Ramos gets his chance, but I mean he's probably at third. And then I think Jacob Gonzalez, like if we're lucky enough to where all 3 of those guys are playing, Jacob Gonzalez probably just slides over and plays second, would be my guess. But look, I mean, maybe it's Montgomery at third and Gonzalez at short and you trade Ramos. Who knows, right? But I think that's, 2 of those 3 guys are left-handed. And I think Gonzalez is probably the only one of the 3 that could play on the right side, that could play second base. So, like, yeah, hopefully you've got 2 guys on the left side that could be fixtures for a while. The thing about Brian Ramos is he, like, hasn't even played at Charlotte yet. And look, I don't know how necessary it is, but it is interesting. Like I don't know that he'll go back to AA or where he's going to start. He's on the 40-man using option years. So, I'd like to see him at Charlotte to start, hopefully.
All right, James Fox, he's from FutureSox, a great read, solid podcast, all-around good guy, and gave us a little bit of insight on some of the guys that we should be seeing soon. I don't know if any of them are going to break camp. I mean, I'm rooting for Nastrini. I feel like I just want to see them make one move, James, where it's like we had a plan going into spring training, but this guy just wowed us. That would make me feel good coming into the season.
Yeah, if they said Nastrini's the 5th starter and we're just going to figure out the rest, yeah, that would be cool. That would be awesome.
SoxInTheBasement.com is all about support. We support you. You want to make a bet? We have the best offers available in the Sox in the Basement Sportsbook. And you support us because if you take advantage of those offers, we get a kickback. I'm not looking for donations. You make money, I make money. Maybe sometimes I give some to Ed. And then we're also supporting small business with our brand new Vouch store. Check out Split Rock Coffee, made by veterans for everyone to the benefit of veterans. And I'm a big fan of the Camp Craft cocktails. Just add liquor to what they've already sent you and you are a master bartender. See all of this at SoxInTheBasement.com. And that conversation there about Nick Nastrini, where again, I really think that if he makes the rotation, it says a lot about their evaluation process and how they're going to run the team. Because if the guy forces his way in to a rotation where they had really pretty much set who they thought was going to make it in there, and they've kind of telegraphed the 5, and he's not one of them. You got to make a room on the 40-man roster for him. But if they do that, I'd be excited. Unfortunately, though, it kind of sounds like most likely all this young talent is going to start down in the minor leagues.
I think that's what spring training should be about, though. Okay, is young guys that you're not saying are ready, or you're not convinced are ready, proving something wrong. And this team, I'm sorry, there's just no way you can sit there and say that there are established guys in the rotation that cannot be moved. Because if you eat Chris Flexen's salary based on what you're paying him on the contract you signed him to, it's not the end of the world if Nick Nastrini beats him out. I think
put Flexen into a long relief role. He's done that before. Have him be the 6th starter. I mean, I would still have him on the bench.
I'm not saying that you get rid of him entirely, but I'm just using him as an example of if young guys beat out veterans on this team. If Chris Flexen pitches terribly, okay, and there are multiple young guys on the team, so Jordan Leisure pitches well. There's any number of guys, really. Bailey Horn, for that matter. I mean, if you want to go with that. I mean, right now you got Josemar Cousin has gotten a lot of opportunities and has looked okay. Davy Garcia is going to make the team, it looks like. But like if Leisure and Nastrini were to beat somebody out, my point is that there's no overwhelming amount of veteran presence on this team that you sit there and go, God, you just can't replace these guys. Nick Nastrini is truly blocked, but I just think it's an opportunity for him. And this is the fun part of spring training, back to the beginning of the show. One of the fun parts of spring training is, can the young guys beat out some of these fringy veterans? And that's what we have here. And that's when you're sitting there looking at, like, say, is Braden Shoemake, who's got 4 steals to lead the major leagues in spring training, by the way, and is hitting 286 on the spring and has shown some signs of life and is a glove first guy and really fits Chris Getz's profile. Is he a guy that makes Danny Mendick have to sweat, for the utility role? Because Shoemake doesn't really look like a guy who's ever going to be a starter based on what he's done in the minors, but he would make a good utility guy.
Well, it is weird because think about it. If you take a look right now at the stats, and stats don't matter this early in spring training, but right now all the guys that you're expecting not to make the team are doing really well, and all the guys that everybody kind of feels like are going to make the team are not doing very well, right? Like Gavin Sheets is like an 1100 OPS, and you talk to most people, you read enough articles, and you're like, there's no room for him on this team because they're going to take Moustakas. They're going to take Mendick. They're going to take Pilar. And so, like, it'll be interesting to see what actually influences their decisions when it comes time to finalize the roster.
The idea that we're putting any stock into this early in spring training is funny because, like you said, the stats can't matter right now because it's too early for these guys who've gotten off to good starts to really have established themselves. It's the same thing with Garrett Crochet when he pitched 2 really great innings and looked electric. Well, we've seen Garrett Crochet do that, but we got to wait until the end of spring training when he's trying to do it for 5 innings, in a really stretched out start to really make an evaluation. We got to see what, if Eloy Jimenez cools way off after this week and spends the rest of spring training hitting terribly and just doing nothing, it's going to look a lot different than the guy who's hitting 500 with an 1100 OPS right now. And as everyone's like, hey, Eloy looks good. And if Gavin Sheets stops hitting, well, then the prophecies will come true and he will not be on the team. And, if Dominic Fletcher, who right now looks terrible at the plate and his stats are awful, all right, he's hitting 125 with a 451 OPS. He looks terrible. That's not what Dominic Fletcher has been, though, in his career. And you suspect that he's got a chance if he just, he might be pressing right now. He's got a chance to turn it around and hit really well over the rest of spring training and just absolutely, get back into what we expected when he got, we got him in the trade. So there's a lot that can go on still, but it is kind of interesting, to sit there and say, as we're watching some of the young guys, especially on the pitching staff, but as we're watching some of the young guys, do they have enough, if they're off to a good start, to finish off and maintain this? And are they really arriving? Or did they just get off to a good start and we're going to slowly see them devolve back into the player that we expect needs more time and seasoning down at AAA or AA or wherever they're ticketed for?
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.